Today we talk about the game that comes with Line of Fire issue 13. This is the last issue of the in-house magazine by Lock and Load, a magazine devoted to all things Lock and Load that, for example, publishes extra scenarios for Lock and Load games. This is an issue that is special to me for a variety of reasons. For example, because there's a very interesting interview in here with a certain maverick wargame reviewer, I don't know, I can't read the name, it sounds like Spanish or something. Other than that, this is also a very important issue because it comes with a full game, which is a great event. On top of that, it is a game on a topic that I'm very much interested into, and a topic that is very much underrepresented in wargaming, the Crimean War. And the game that comes with this issue of Line of Fire is called Blood on the Alma. It covers the Battle of the Alma River, the opening battle of the Crimean War. And that was a battle that was interesting for a variety of reasons because of the tactical blunders that took place there, given to several poor decisions that were made at the command level because of the terrain, because of the technologies that were used that battle. In particular, this was the first battle in which the Minier rifles showed their uncanny range, uncanny for the standards of the time, of course, and that, of course, added just a completely new element to the battle. So a lot of reasons why this battle is interesting, and I'm pleased with the fact that this game really tries to capture all of these things. This game really relies on a design philosophy that wants to emphasize the historical element of the game. There's a lot of chrome, a lot of flavor in this game. Let me show you how the game works and how the game tries to capture the spirit of the Battle of the Alma River. This is the map for the game. It is printed on paper. Here you place it on the piece of plexiglass, which creates this reflection here. Here you see the setup with the French groups here, French units here, with a group of Turkish soldiers attached to them, British units, and these units are advancing towards the Alma River, and they're trying to climb on top of this elevation here and to take control of some objective axes. Here outlined in light blue you have an objective X for the French, and these are the three objective axes for the British player, or for the British side. The Russians are defending here on the other side of the river, on top of the elevation. It is a good position, however, unfortunately for them, the Russians forgot to properly defend this area here. There isn't a good defense ready here, so the French units will probably be able to get on the high ground from here. And at this point, the Russian player will have to choose. Well, the main choice for the Russian player really is to choose between defending in this area here, concentrating the defense there, but then of course there will be two groups of enemies closing in, or the Russian player can choose to redeploy some units here and try to slow down the French units as they're trying to climb up the elevation. Therefore, the Russian player can choose to try to take advantage of high ground. But this is the main dilemma for the Russian player. Now, the turn structure here is unusual because the different movement phases and combat phases are intertwined. The game goes back and forth between the factions. It is not first the Allies and then the Russians, or the other way around. Here's the turn structure. First, the French and Turk units move. This is pretty straightforward. Units move up to their full movement allowance, which is the number printed at the bottom right corner of the counter. That number will be, the expenditure of movement points will be modified by terrain. Then you had the French artillery phase. Artillery units that did not move can fire up to 2 axes away if they have a line of sight to their opponent. If they moved, they receive a marker that says they cannot fire that turn. Then you have the Russian movement phase, during which I noticed that the Russians tend to run away. They tend to retreat, possibly to try to avoid combat or to delay confrontation with the French, because the next phase is the French combat phase, during which units can attack enemy units, and some units may be able to use a minier attack. Units that have this symbol here are armed with very powerful long-range minier rifles. They can attack adjacent units normally, or they can attack an enemy 2 or 3 axes away with the minier rifles. I'll tell a little bit about that later. Then you have the Russian artillery phase. The Russian artillery units that did not move in the previous phase can fire. Then you have the British activation phase. This is different from everything else in the game. When you have the French movement phase, French units move, then in the combat phase they fight. The British units activate independently. A unit moves and fights, then the next unit activates, moves and fights. And units are activated randomly. They are divided in groups that are activated by drawing activation chits that are placed in a randomizer, and the units belonging to the group that is activated can move and fight. The number of activations that the British faction receives depends on the level of Russian morale, which is tracked on that track there. As the Russians lose units and lose objective access, the Russian morale goes down, and the Allies receive several advantages, including receiving more activations for the British player, for the British side. So British units keep activating until they have performed all of their activations, or until they incur in a blunder. That happens when a British unit is eliminated, or when a British unit is forced to retreat. In that case, the British activation is over, the British phase is over, no matter how many activations are left. After the British activation phase, you will have the Russian combat phase, then finally the Russian morale phase, during which the morale of the Russian player will be modified based on whether or not there are Russian units that are panicked, and based on control of objective access. If the Allied player controls one or more objective access, then the Russian morale starts going down quite fast. If the Russian morale goes down to the end of the morale track, then the Russian player loses the game and the Allied player wins the game. In order to win the game, the Russian player needs to inflict a certain amount of step losses on the opponent. Here you have a series of axes where you will move these counters to keep track of the number of Allied steps that have been lost, that the Russian player has been able to inflict on the opponent. In order to win the game early on, the Russian player needs to inflict 30 steps of losses on the opponent. When the Russian morale goes past a certain threshold, then the Russian player needs 35 step losses in order to win the game. Units have a number of steps which is equal to the number printed at the bottom left corner of each counter plus 1. So if a unit like that one has a 2, you will place 2 step counters under that unit, and then the unit itself on top of those counters. So that unit in reality has 3 steps, 2 under the counter and 1 represented by the counter itself. Each time that the unit takes a hit, you remove a step. When the unit only has a single step, you flip it on this side to indicate that that unit will be destroyed the next time it takes a hit. Now, combat is resolved in a unified way. There is a single system, a single procedure that applies to infantry, cavalry, and artillery, and yet it still has enough detail to make each type of attack unique. This is because each type of attack uses a specific set of modifiers. There is one for infantry, one for cavalry, and one for artillery. An attack always begins with the attacker calculating his total attack number, which is the sum of the modifiers that apply. For example, infantry attacks by adding together the army morale modifier. This is based on the present level of Russian morale, +1 per step that the attacker still has, +1 per support. That is, if there are friendly units that are projecting a zone of control on the defender, +1 if you're attacking downhill, +1 if your attacking unit is greater than the defender, +1 if support is being given by units in the same division, but this only applies to the ally player. Then the defender needs to take a defense roll, and the exact type of roll is based on, well, you find it out by cross-referencing the attacker type, the type of unit that is attacking, with the elevation at which the defender is defending. As you can see, there are different types of possible rolls, usually X plus 1 or 2 d6s, and X is the number of steps that the defending unit still has. Now, suppose that we totaled all the modifiers for the attack and we have an attack number of 6. Then the defender has 2 steps, rolls, and rolls a 2. Now the defender has a total defense number of 4, 6 and 4. At this point, we look at the combat result table. We cross-reference the type of unit that is attacking with the combat differential, that is, the attack number minus the defense number. 6 minus 4 is 2. Infantry was attacking, then we have an exchange. Both the attacker and the defender lose a step. Had the attack number been lower than the defense number, then the attacker would take a casualty and then would have to retreat. Different types of results, as you can see, are possible, but they're all based on the same idea. Defense roll depending on the elevation, and attack number based on the different conditions that will benefit specific types of units. Then you have the melee attacks, which are ridiculously powerful, as they should be. For every 2 steps rounding up, the unit that is attacking with a melee attack receives a die. So a unit with 3 steps will roll 3 dice. You get an extra die if you didn't move right before firing. And then you simply check the results that you rolled individually against this table here. A 1, 2, or a 3 would inflict a casualty on the defender. So with 3 dice, you could inflict 3 steps of damage on the defender. A P on top of that means that the unit is panicked. An M means that the unit needs to take a morale check and that the unit may panic. If it fails the morale check, a unit that panics has no zone of control, cannot move, cannot attack, and being panicked is also particularly bad for the Russian player because it will affect the Russian morale negatively. This is a good design. It is a very strong design when it comes to historical feel. There are more details, more rules, exceptions that I haven't mentioned in my review that are part of the design and that increase the historical flavor even more. Units that behave in specific ways, that have unique advantages, extra procedures and rules to then modify the British activations, and when the British start being able to use the mini rifles. There are a lot of these elements that really give you a strong historical sense. As a representation of the Battle of the Alma River, to me, this is an effective one. It really mirrored what I knew about the battle, what I think is interesting about the battle. It was a pleasure to see history come alive through the procedures of the game. At the same time, gameplay-wise, the game has a couple of minuses. One, which is overall a minor one really, is that the unusual turn sequence feels really unnatural. It is different from anything else that I've seen. It may feel a little forced the first time that you play. I found myself referring to the sequence of play for quite a while, even after a while that I was playing the game. That is unusual to me. I just couldn't wrap my mind around the way in which different phases were intermingled, And also, of course, there was the extra then level of figuring out how to take advantage of this, what were the possibilities that this sequence of play presented, things like this. It took a little bit. It is a minor thing though, but it's another element that I have to mention, and that is longevity. I believe that this is a game with a short longevity, one that may start feeling repetitive quite soon after you start playing it, or quite soon after you become competent. Why so? Well, the strongest element of the game is the historical feel, how the game captures that historical feel, but precisely because of this, the game limits the options a lot. On top of this, the map is not very large, it doesn't have million hexes. There's just a certain sequence of events that definitely tends to come back game after game. The major variant, the major element of variety here is the British activation system. Of course, sometimes the British units will start activating randomly. You have the feeling that they activate more randomly than usual, meaning they get in each other's way and they create traffic jams. After this, one unit starts running and charging while everybody else just sits there and does nothing, and that unit probably will end up destroyed when charging alone without support against the Russian guns. This is fun, but at the same time, you really see that the protagonists here are the Russians and the French units, and those are more predictable. That is, to me, one of the things that will limit really the replay value of the game. That is, there are some options that are obvious, and I don't see the point in experimenting with fantasy versions of the game. I don't mean with elves and dwarves, but I mean with trying with completely different deployments. I don't know, because to me, what really is great about this game is how the game captures the battle, what a good representation of the battle this is, and I think that if you apply this system and these rules to a completely generic representation of the battle, completely generic confrontation on this map, then I don't know that the game would be all that interesting gameplay wise. So to me, this is probably the biggest minus one that has to be mentioned and one that has to be taken into consideration. Other than this, if you have any interest in the Crimean War, in the Battle of the Alma River, or just in wargaming that is not complicated but oozes with historical feel and with theme, then this is a good choice.